end the week. What a turnout, to say the least. One of the largest that we've had in a long time. So I thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here this morning. Want to thank our sponsor, providing the breakfast to each and every one of you. BAE Systems, which is a giant in our community, represented by Tom Bishop, a giant himself. We all know what BAE has done for the community. I've said it before. Whenever there's a worthy cause here in this wonderful state, BAE steps up to the plate. They're always there. What can we do? So they're proud of being part of the community. So we're grateful to have them as a member of the New England Council and to have Tom's support too. 2025 is off to a great start for the New England Council. In the next couple of weeks, we'll have programs similar to what we're doing here this morning with Congressman Richie Neal, who was the former chairman of the Ways and Means Committee from Springfield, Massachusetts, the 1st Congressional District. And then we'll also end the week with another colleague of the Congresswoman and Ayanna Presley, who'll be speaking to the New England Council in Boston. Registration is open for our 2025 Washington Leaders Conference on May 14th and 15th. We hope that many of you will participate in 2 days of hearing from people from the executive branch and the legislative branch and from the media to get a good perspective of what is going on in Washington. And in years past, we've had nearly 300 people from all 6 New England states, and they come and they meet all 21 members of Congress from New England, the 12 United States senators, and so many other policymakers in Washington. It's a great 2 days of event, and the staff in Washington does an extraordinary job in providing the venues and the speakers, but anyone who's been there will say that it's a great 2 days of education on what is going on in our nation's capital. So hopefully many of you will take advantage of it. We'll be back here in the Granite State on May 29th to celebrate a centennial, believe it or not. The New England Council is 100 years old this year, and there are days like yesterday and today I feel like I'm 100 years old. And what we do is we have these centennial toasts throughout all 6 New England states, and to say thank you. Thank you to our members, and we hope that maybe the Congresswoman will be able to participate in our event that we're going to be having here next month in the BVI, and hope many of you will participate and come and celebrate an extraordinary achievement, accomplishment of the New England Council. It's the oldest, largest business organization in the United States. And the genesis basically is, if we work together, we have strength. It's as simple as that. We're only 5% of the nation's population, New England, but I think we fight above our weight if we work together. We also have 12% of the United States Senate in New England, and yet 5%. One of my colleagues is in California, and we worked on some pieces of legislation, and she said to me, we have 42 million people. I said, what does New England have? Like 13.5 million people, and yet you have 12 United States Senators just working together. And the 21 members of the delegation, as the Congressman has already probably been aware of, they fight above their weight. These people are savvy, they know the process, and whether they're in the majority or the minority, they're pretty effective in what they do, and it's because they work together as a delegation. And it's one of the few areas of the country where they work together as a delegation, not as a city, not as a state, but as a region, because working together obviously has great strength. But today we're delighted to host our first program with the newest member of the United States Congress and the newest member of the New England Congressional Delegation, Representative Maggie Goodlander. A lot of Maggies up here. We got to keep track of these names. And so, but what a resume and what a bio. So stay with me. But obviously, she's no stranger to public service. She began her career working as a foreign policy advisor to the late Senator John McCain, and went on to serve as an intelligence officer in the United States Navy Reserve for over a decade. After graduating from law school and serving as a law clerk to Justice Stephen Breyer on the United States Supreme Court, she taught constitutional law at the University of New Hampshire and Dartmouth. She returned to D.C. and served as a counsel in the first impeachment of President Donald Trump, and more recently at the U.S. Department of Justice as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Now in her first term in Congress, she's serving on the House Armed Services Committee and the Small Business Committee, where she's well positioned to serve key interests here in the Granite State. So, not a bad resume, right? I mean, so what else have you done? I mean, my God, very, very impressive to say the least. But so we have a couple of questions, but we want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here at the New England Council in St. A's. So with that, maybe just talk about your first 3 months in office, your background in the Justice Department and the Supreme Court, and the military. These 3 months, have there been any surprises? Have there been any? I'm trying to be diplomatic. I mean, challenges, maybe. Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's so great to be. Can you all hear me all right? It's so great to be with so many friends, and thank you, Jim, for having this conversation with me. Thanks to St. A's for hosting us. I see a lot of my heroes on the wall, including Senator John McCain just before the exit sign. He would sometimes quote or maybe misquote Mao Zedong, who said, "It's always darkest before it's pitch black." I think that, look, we're 74 days into this new administration, and you asked about surprises. I think there have been a lot of shocking developments that are in some ways unsurprising. Just take, for example, the last 24 hours. I don't know, I think it is pretty surprising that we're in a trade war with Canada already, 74 days into a new administration. But these tariffs, I really do believe that tariffs can be a powerful tool for economic justice, to protect American workers, small businesses, hardworking families. The way that they've been wielded is really to bring about what the National Review called the biggest tax hike in American history. And costs are going to go up. I think this is a surprising and really bad development. Coupled with that is what's been done to Congress's power to be a check on the extraordinary use of power just to take tariffs as an example. We had a longstanding law that allowed for the House and the Senate to challenge, to call a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives, the body closest to the people, on any use of tariffs under the statute that President Trump cited for the use of his tariff authority. One of the first things that happened in this Congress was that authority was wiped away by the Republican majority in the House of Representatives. To me, it's bad for New Hampshire. It's bad for small businesses across the country. This is a very surprising and worrisome development just in these first 74 days. But what I'd say, too, what's been surprising in an encouraging way is to see how people have rallied from across the ideological spectrum. And, I was very proud to work for Senator McCain. I've worked with Republicans, I've worked with Democrats, I've worked with independents my entire career on issues that I think should unite us as Americans. And I do believe that we are united as Americans on a few really basic principles that have been put to the test in these first 74 days. When we make a promise as a government, we deliver on that promise. And the promise of Social Security is one that we're going to deliver on. I think we see across the ideological spectrum people rallying from all across this state to protect Social Security. At a moment when it's been called a Ponzi scheme by the richest man in the world, who's exercising more power than we've ever seen in our history over our government. He's put it on the chopping block, but people are stepping up and they're speaking out. I don't think anyone voted for the largest cuts to Medicaid in American history. And what I'm seeing and hearing all across New Hampshire are people coming out, stepping up, speaking out about these developments. And I think the way that you govern in the minority, and I am in the minority in the House of Representatives, although it's the narrowest margin in a generation in the House of Representatives. Never been harder to count to 5, I will tell you that. But I'm never going to stop trying. We have the chance to continue to bring people together around basic principles that have always made this country great.
So when you go around your district here and you talk to them about the tariff, what kind of businesses are you talking to who are saying they're affected negatively by this?
You know, I've from Main Street in Nashua to Main Street in Colebrook, retailers come to mind first. You know, retailers who are, a lot of these small businesses are, the uncertainty is the word I'd put. You know, it's what's pervasive. Alongside the anger and the fear, and I think fear is what's underlying a lot of the anger, it's the uncertainty that this situation has been, that the president has created with this use of tariffs. So small businesses who are trying to make decisions, basic bottom line decisions about how they can carry out on their business plans, about hiring, basic hiring decisions. Mm-hmm. You know, these developments have not created more jobs. They've actually caused small businesses to have to lay people off. You see this in restaurants. Look, the grocery store is where we're going to start feeling this pain first, I'm afraid to say. I'm sorry to say. We've already seen one of the biggest increases in the cost of eggs in American history in these first 74 days, and prices are going to continue to go up. So it's felt across the board. It really, and it's because these are across the board tariffs mm-hmm. that have been wielded with almost no data. I mean, this is one of the shocking things, that it's, you know, an analogy was made that you don't do science, you don't exercise and implement these kinds of powerful tools without actual data to underlie it. And I have not seen any defense of these tariffs as a matter of economic policy. They've been used as a tool to shake other countries down and to jack up costs for hardworking people. Mm.
You know, you mentioned Senator McCain, and he was really somebody that believed in bipartisanship, making friends on the other side, whether it be Senator Kennedy, Orrin Hatch. I mean, he just had some wonderful friends in different areas, depending on the subject matter. To be effective, you really do have to develop relationships on the other side to be effective. And in your short period of term, are you spending any time getting to know people on the other side to say, you know, he or she might be somebody I can work with on Social Security or, you know, NIH, whatever the issue is, but develop and relate, not just with your own members, but beyond and the other side.
Absolutely. Look, that's my job. I'm in Congress now to actually work and deliver for New Hampshire. And being in the minority, the only way you can really get things done is by working on a bipartisan basis. So I'm really guided by something that Senator Kennedy said, which is, you know, he said the way he worked was to always find the 30%. You might disagree with someone on 70%, but find the 30% and get it done. These days, 30% is really a lot, actually, to agree on. But I'm looking for the 3%, the 0.3%, wherever it exists. And, you know, so far, I've been a part of leading 30 bipartisan bills in the House of Representatives, and even yesterday, you know, yesterday was a tough day for this country. But yesterday, we introduced a bipartisan bill that would actually, it's something I hear about a lot on the campaign trail, and I know we have educators in the room, but under IDEA, and Jim, you've been a real leader in our country on protecting the rights of people with disabilities. This is a federal statute signed into law in 1975. Congress made a promise that we would fund at 40% the education of our students with disabilities. Congress has repeatedly failed to live up to that responsibility. We're at less than 13% in funding right now. This is a bipartisan bill that will actually make sure that we make real that promise and deliver on that promise. And that was just yesterday. These 30 bills, I would say about more than half of them have to do with protecting and defending workers, including federal workers, by by filling gaps in federal law that give federal workers protections that they didn't have before, filling the gap for workers across the board and reaffirming and making clear collective bargaining rights, basic rights of workers across this country. These are all bipartisan bills. We've got the first bill, and I'll tell you this, in the minority, you've got to find leverage and create leverage wherever you possibly can. So one of the tools I used was the room lottery in the House of Representatives. So the way it works is when you get there, every member of Congress has to pick a number, literally out of a hat, to get your office assignment. And so I felt a great deal of responsibility to pick a very good office for New Hampshire in the House of Representatives. And I was really lucky I picked number 10. The way it works is you're in a room in the Capitol. There a whole sea of computer screens. You got 5 minutes on the clock. Each person gets 5 minutes on the clock. And if the clock runs out, then you go to the back of the line. So I felt a great sense of responsibility in those 45 minutes that I had, because I was number 10, to find the best office I could. I ran all over the place, and my mom, Betty, who's here this morning, was my partner in finding this office. We opened up the first few doors in the Longworth House office building. She said, "This looks like a college dorm room. We can't pick this office." We finally found an office that seemed all right. Longworth, I think it was 1432. So I sprint back, I'm sweating, I get to this room in the Capitol, I'm about to tell them Longworth 1432, and one of my colleagues comes up to me, says, "Maggie, is there any way you'd consider not picking this room in Longworth?" I said, "Well, who are you?" He said, I'm Tom Barrett from Michigan. I said, "Oh, Tom Barrett from Michigan, you just flipped Alyssa Slutkin's seat, didn't you?" He said, "Yes, I did." I said, "Well, why do you want this office?" He said, "It was my great-grandfather's office." I said, "Well, that's a pretty good reason, Tom Barrett from Michigan. Will you co-sponsor 3 bills with me?" He said, "Maggie, I'd work with anyone." I said, "No, Tom, 3 bills. Let's shake, get the picture," and we did. We now have a whole album of photographs together just to make sure, so that I told him what each one of these bill signings, we're going to add a new photograph to the album. The first bill that we introduced together, a bipartisan bill called the Assist Act. This is one example. So we've got 2 more bills with Tom Barrett, but 30 bills so far. I'm never going to stop trying to find common ground and get things done, because that's what I got into this work to do, and that's what New Hampshire deserves.
The Doge and Elon Musk, that has caused a great deal of upheaval throughout the country. What are you seeing in your district or state?
Look, I'm all about cutting and cracking down on waste, fraud, and abuse. This is a core tenet of making sure that government works for hardworking people in New Hampshire, and that's my North Star in everything I do. What does this mean for hardworking people in New Hampshire? I was optimistic in the before times when I read about what the priorities of DOGE were supposed to be. Auditing the Pentagon, something that I'm really motivated to do as a member of the House Armed Services Committee. You know, the Marine Corps is the only part of the Department of Defense that's actually passed a clean audit. That's outrageous. You know, making our procurement process more efficient and effective. These were the things, making filing taxes easier for people across this country. These were the things that DOGE talked about before January 20th. Since January 20th, what we've seen truly is the most powerful entity I think that we've ever seen in the executive branch in the history of the United States government, run by the richest man in the world, who's been entirely unaccountable to the American people and to the Congress, who has collected more highly sensitive data of everyone in this room and everyone across our country, access to these databases, with no real reason or need to know, as far as we can tell, and as far as federal courts have determined so far. To what ends? I mean, what we're seeing in New Hampshire is the targeting of Social Security offices. To give you one example, the Social Security office in Littleton is a small but mighty and critically important part of daily life for hundreds of people across New Hampshire, from Freedom all the way up to Pittsburgh. This is an office that makes a material difference in the lives of people across this state. It's been targeted for no good reason, for no reason that we can discern. So DOJ has become the least transparent entity that I've ever encountered in government. And the kinds of cuts that it's put on the table, first of all, can't be trusted or verified. And this is one of the things that I'm really working hard to do, to bring more transparency to the work that DOJ is doing right now, because there's never been a time of greater asymmetry. In our office, we rely heavily, and one of the things I want to say to this room, we rely heavily on hearing directly from the people who I work for, the people in New Hampshire, to know how you're being impacted by decisions that are being made by a small group of people who are unaccountable to the American people. And so we rely heavily on hearing from you directly. We know some of the cuts that DOJ has put on the table, but every day we're learning about more. And so I hope you'll all reach out to us. We've got our great team here, from most of whom are from St. A's, actually. So thank you, St. A's. I hope we will hear from you directly, but I think that the damage that's being done is both in the short term, the uncertainty and the pain that people are going to feel by cuts. Someone put it to me the other day, actually Secretary McMahon at the Department of Education. She said, sometimes when you're making cuts, you cut into muscle. I mean, think about that. You do. They have. And some of these cuts can't be reversed. When you let go federal workers who have dedicated their lives to protecting our nuclear arsenal, for example, which is one of the cuts that happened, it's really hard to get these people back. I hear from our shipyard workers at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, who have some of the hardest, most thankless jobs in our country, some of the most important jobs in keeping us all safe, who wake up every day and live in fear and uncertainty about whether they're going to be able to come to work tomorrow. And they should be thinking about nothing else other than the mission in front of them. I hear the same thing from FAA air traffic controllers who the cuts that have happened there, the damage is going to be very real in the short term. And in the long term, the damage is to our system of checks and balances. Congress has, I carry my Constitution with me everywhere I go. Congress has the power of the purse. When money is appropriated and promised to New Hampshire, we got to deliver on that promise. And it shouldn't be up to an unelected billionaire to turn on and off the spigots of federal dollars, to weaponize these dollars against the people of this state and of our country.
New England is blessed to have some outstanding educational and health institutions. Some of them are right in the room here. And they've been recipients of $5 billion in NIH, National Science Foundation. And many of those dollars are either frozen or have been cut. And in particular, of concern to some of our members is the 15% cap on the facility and administrative support that the administration is now seeking. Your thoughts on how this is going to play out and what you're hearing from, again, the institutional, educational, and the healthcare people?
Look, the cuts to NIH, to research across the board, I was just having this conversation right before we got started. It's cuts across the board. The Department of Defense is undertaking some of the most important and exciting clinical trial work, and I've heard from people across our state who are themselves part of clinical trials. We have tens of thousands of people across the country who are participating in this, whose lives depend on the research and the advances that our country has been able to lead the world in for my whole lifetime and for generations. We've put this work at risk. We've put a generation of research and leadership in this area. We've put it at risk, and who are we ceding it to? The People's Republic of China. China is going to step up and fill in the gaps wherever they are, because at bottom, this is about keeping our people safe and healthy. This is about providing basic health care, but it's also about leadership in the world. And we have ceded both. We've put people's lives at risk, and we have put our national security and global leadership on the chopping block too.
I mean, you make a good point that with the cuts, the frozen grants, that China, Canada, parts of Europe are now recruiting those scientists, saying, you've been rejected, come here, we'll give you the staff, we'll give you the equipment that you need. So we could be in a position of losing some of the best and the brightest. But my question on the NIH and National Science Foundation Fund, wouldn't that be an opportunity to work across the aisle to say, you know what, this isn't just a New England issue, losing. North Carolina, the triangle, the research triangle down there, or Alabama, which gets a tremendous amount of NIH funding. Wouldn't it be maybe somebody like you to say, I'm going to reach out to the Congress leaders of those districts to say, we can form a little coalition to say, this is a national.
Yep. So, you know, the job I left before taking up this one was leading the president's unity agenda. One of the central pillars of the unity agenda was taking on cancer, ending cancer as we know it right now in this country. It was part of the unity agenda. The basic idea is we've got big challenges that are not challenges we should think about as Republicans or Democrats. These are challenges that unite us as Americans. So ending cancer as we know it. Everyone in this room has been touched, I'm sure, by cancer. You know someone who's battling cancer. You yourself have battled cancer. It's a great uniter and an area where the United States of America has led the world in research and in ending cancer as we know it. I think Dartmouth Health is here this morning. I spent a lot of time with the extraordinary people at Dartmouth Health who are helping to lead our country. One of a few dozen, I think 45, national NIH recognized cancer centers in this country. And so this was about 2 months ago. I thought, you know what I should do? I should look at the map of this country, of where the other cancer centers are located, where the cancer clusters in this country are located. And sure enough, it's a purple constellation of red and blue districts. And so I have reached out to my colleagues who are similarly situated, who have these great opportunities, NIH-funded centers for actually tackling one of, cancer, which is uniting us all. And the work continues. As I said, it's never been harder to count to 5 for me in any time in my life than it has been in trying to find 5 colleagues in the House of Representatives who will work with me and unite with me. But I will never stop trying, because this is what we're up against. And so I'm so proud of the work that's happening in New Hampshire, the ways in which we're leading, and I'm open and eager to execute on any ideas that you have for how we can make the case best. And the case really at bottom is about the ways in which, so much of when you're in the midst of a war against the federal government, the imperative for those of us who are trying to protect and defend the work that it does is to explain to people what it is that we're up against. And so, yes, that is what I'm trying to do every single day.
Last week we were all kind of shocked to learn that our top national security officials were discussing the war plans in a group chat on the app Signal. You have a deep background in this area, national security, being a national, the Navy Reserve officer, but also your husband being the national security advisor to President Biden. So, I mean, you're deep into the knowledge of security. Your thoughts when you heard it and what you think should be done?
This was a shocking revelation. I spent 11 years as an intelligence officer in the Navy Reserve, and the idea that operational war plans of any kind would be discussed anywhere other than the classified spaces and systems that we've invested in creating for precisely this purpose. It's outrageous, and it really puts people's lives at risk. We have rules governing classified information for really good reasons. And at bottom, it's about keeping our people safe, keeping the women and men who put on the uniform and who are willing to give their lives for our country, but should never be put in harm's way because of a desire for convenience on someone's personal cell phone. I mean, it's a complete outrage. It speaks, though, to the concern I have. Look, in the House of Representatives, I didn't have a vote on Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. But I said it loud and clear then, before the vote, what I believe now, which is that he lacks the judgment and lacks the experience to be leading the Department of Defense, to be leading the Pentagon. 3 million people across this country, a $900 billion budget, and some of the most important work that happens in our government. He lacks the judgment and experience to be leading this. And this latest example from last week, which is, thank God that everyone was safe. Thank God that nothing bad happened. But this was just an ordinary Saturday in this administration. I'm encouraged that the Department of Defense is obviously the Inspector General, the acting Inspector General, because one of the first acts of this president was to fire Inspectors General all across the government. The acting Inspector General is undertaking an investigation into this, and I believe that's an important and essential step for accountability. But I don't believe that Pete Hegseth ever should have been confirmed in the first place. I believe he should resign, and if he doesn't resign, President Trump should fire him. This is a fireable offense if I've ever seen one.
Okay. You're on the Armed Services Committee. That's an important committee for many people here in New England. As an observer on the outside, I always thought the Armed Services Committee, they really work well together, Democrats and Republicans, and the proof is in the pudding. The National Defense Authorization Act that we've had for some 60 years has passed bipartisan.
63 years.
63? Okay, thank you.
Knock on wood, 64 soon.
Your thoughts and what your priorities are going to be on that committee?
Yeah, look, I serve on the Armed Services Committee and the Small Business Committee. They're two of the most bipartisan committees in Congress, and that's why I wanted to be on them, because they actually do the work. They actually legislate, and the National Defense Authorization Act is still the number one vehicle for actually getting things done in Congress. And I knock on wood again, because we got to make that true this coming year. The work has already begun. We've really tried to listen to people all across New Hampshire to understand where the opportunities and priorities lie. And the work on this bill has already begun. I mentioned the 30 bipartisan bills that I've been a part of already. A lot of these bills have to do with protecting our service members and veterans. And I'm on the Personnel Subcommittee on the Armed Services Committee. And I got to see up close how this committee can work at its best, working for Senator McCain. I think if you had said to me 10 years ago, you're going to really want to be on the Personnel Subcommittee, I would have said, wow, something strange must have happened in the world. But the reason I want to be on it is it's actually an opportunity to really get things done, not just for our service members and veterans, but also to be, the Department of Defense is the biggest purchaser in the world. It's at bottom, part of it is it's a business. And so how can we make this business work better, and how can we make the people who work for this business actually have lower cost of living, have more affordable housing? And this is where a lot of our work is going to lie in this upcoming bill. How do we make sure that our service members are getting access to the basic health care that they need? And these continue to be really bipartisan lines of effort, and I think it's a real bright spot in an otherwise very challenging landscape. But the other thing I'd say too is, you mentioned BAE, and I'm really grateful. Before I took this job, I was at the Department of Justice in the Antitrust Division, and I thought a lot about consolidation across our economy, including in the defense industrial base. BAE and so many folks in this room today are part of making our defense industrial base more competitive and more exceptional and functional for this country. And so I'm really, this is an area where we're still getting huge bipartisan support and interest. And this is where I really hope this administration will focus more of its effort in we talk about efficiency, we talk about cracking down on waste, fraud, and abuse. No better opportunity to do that than in our defense acquisition systems and in the way that our defense industrial base operates. We should be the most competitive in the world, and I want to be a part of making that so.
The administration announced recently that they're going to move the student loan from the Department of Education to Small Business, SBA. There are some people very concerned about that. You think that's going to be a good fit?
You know, abolishing the Department of Education seemed like a really radical idea when it was first introduced in Project 2025. I heard about Project 2025 from one of my colleagues, a career federal prosecutor at the Justice Department, who found it on the Heritage Foundation's website before it captured the imagination of this administration. And I remember turning to the section about abolishing the Department of Education. You know, I mentioned IDEA a few minutes ago. We created the Department of Education because it was really challenging for states to actually comply with federal law and to live up to their responsibilities. It's very expensive to administer a lot of these programs, and the department was created for a good reason. You know, here in New Hampshire, we really rely on federal dollars that flow into this state, but also the administrative structure that this department has given our state, you know, at a time of real pain and challenge for our own state budget. The reorganization of the department, and I've written dozens and dozens of oversight letters trying to get answers from federal departments and agencies across the government. Almost all of them have gone unanswered. Secretary McMahon, to her credit, did agree to meet with me and a group of my colleagues earlier this week to answer our questions about the president's most recent executive order designed to dismantle the Department of Education. And my questions were, who's going to, amidst all these cuts to the federal workforce, who's going to administer the Title I programs? Who's going to administer IDEA? Where is the administration going to come for our student loan programs? We saw press reports suggesting that with respect to IDEA and Title I, those would be moved to the Department of Health and Human Services. Well, we're in the midst of the biggest cuts to HHS in American history. Student loans would go to SBA. I was expecting to get real answers and a real plan from Secretary McMahon. And the truth is there is no plan right now. And this is creating massive uncertainty and instability in how your taxpayer dollars are being administered by this administration. So look, I should mention, a lot of this is going to play out in the federal courts. And we've got, as a member of Congress, I can't sue. The Supreme Court has said that. Limited the ability of members of Congress to actually file lawsuits directly. But these moves have been challenged, and and I think this is important in ensuring that congressional mandates and taxpayer dollars are handled appropriately. So I'm very concerned about this, and the fight's going to continue to get answers and to have transparency and to have an orderly process that's consistent with our Constitution and basic rule of law principles.
You know, Quinnipiac University just came out with a poll, and it said for the first time the Democratic Party is underwater, that they have one of the lowest favorability. I think it's 22%. I know there's an intra-party dispute, revolt within the Democratic Party. Can you talk about where the party is going to go in the future? maybe talk about what happened in Wisconsin as well as in Florida.
Yeah, I really don't think of myself as much of a pundit, although 21%, I think that's actually better than Congress's approval rating.
A little bit, just a little bit.
I really do. The bottom line is, I think when we're talking about messaging rather than substance, we're out of my own element. What I'm really focused on is fighting, doing my job, which is to check, as a member of Congress as an institution, we've got 3 co-equal branches for a reason. So I'm about checking the power where I've got to, but also building and innovating and actually carrying out what I think a basic promise of any elected official should be, which is to deliver for the people I work for, to lower costs, to really create the kind of level playing field that has been the basic promise of our country from its beginning, and has been something that this council has worked for 100 years. And by the way, congratulations on 100 years, because anything that's lasted that long is something worth protecting. And New England is a team sport in New England. Richie Neal, who's the dean of our delegation, said this to me from the outset. I'm the only freshman member of the House from New England, and we do work as a team. But this is what I'm trying to do across the board, to work with anyone who's going to work with me to deliver on the promises that I think every person in our country should expect, to be able to pursue the American dream, to buy a home. We haven't had a chance to talk about housing, but I know there are a lot of incredible people in this room who are waking up every single day and trying to figure out how we can make the cornerstone of the American dream, having a home, possible for people across our state. We've got a lot of work to do. We've got to build more than 60,000 new homes in New Hampshire in the next few years. And by the way, tariffs, I think, are going to make that task a lot harder. But I really believe in the people in this room, the people of our state, who are innovating and who are ready to get to work together. We got a lot of red tape to cut in this process, and I'm eager to do that. But the bottom line is we've got to go back to basics, I think. My own view is that the basic premise that we should all be fighting for is how we make the American dream a reality and a possibility for people in this state and in our country. And housing is an area where I think we can begin to build a lot of traction, but it's going to take also defending against the biggest cuts to Medicaid in American history, the biggest cuts to health care, really, in a generation. It's going to be a mixture of offense and defense, and I'm focused on the actual mission and less the messaging.
We got the news last month that a legend here, the stalwart Senator Jeanne Shaheen, announced that she would not be a candidate in 26 for re-election. Can you talk a little bit about her legacy, but more importantly, any lessons that you learned from her leadership?
Well, I see Senator Shaheen just over there in that photograph. She is a true New Hampshire hero. She's a person, I wouldn't be sitting here right now if it weren't for Senator Shaheen. She paved the way. Growing up here, she was the first woman to serve as our governor. She's the first woman in American history to serve as governor and United States Senator. And she paved the way for another Maggie to do the very same thing. I think everyone in this room probably has their own story of how Senator Shaheen has actually touched your life, whether you reached out to her office to get help, or she helped to lead a legislative effort that made a really big difference in your life. I first saw her in action when I was working for Senator McCain, and I'll never forget it. We were working together on a bipartisan effort to provide visas in a visa program to Afghan and Iraqi interpreters who served alongside our service members in Iraq and Afghanistan. And Senator Shaheen came to the meeting with a yellow legal pad, and She took notes. She listened carefully. She has beautiful handwriting. And she listened carefully. And in her own, and this I think is really her superpower. She really listens to people. She listens and understands New Hampshire better than anyone I know. And so she's held these amazing jobs, but she's done them in a way that really honors what people in this line of work in elected office should be honoring, which is a recognition that I work for you, and that first and foremost the task is to listen. So I couldn't be more excited to work with her over the next 2 years. I chose my committees, and I didn't choose them. I really had to campaign for them and work hard to get on these 2 committees.
But Richie Neal helped you.
Richie Neal did help me. He did help me. Dean Neal.
Dean, yeah.
Armed Services and Small Business. These are 2 committees that Senator Shaheen serves on in the Senate. And I really do believe governing is a team sport. And we've got for New Hampshire an incredible team in our delegation. And on these 2 important committees that are actually going to get things done, a bicameral team to carry them out. So I'm couldn't be more excited to be working with her and learning from her in these next 2 years.
I have more questions, but a few of you have already asked me if you could ask a question of the Congresswoman, so I'll spend a couple of minutes on that. Mark Boyd from AARP has a question.
Hi, Mark.
I thought I had a busy 3 months. You look great.
Thank you.
You heard this. On behalf of AARP, I want to thank you for your work on Social Security. As you know, that's when I go to the mat issues, and we appreciate everything you do. While talking about AARP New Hampshire, we have over 215,000 card-carrying members. During the membership, many, like other members in the United States, have found themselves either a caregiver or in need of caregiving support. As you know, caring for a family member with chronic or acute health care problems can be a struggle to find the time, money, and other resources to manage. What do you see as the prospect for Congress to address those needs during this session?
Well, thank you so much. And I'm a huge fan of AARP and really grateful for the work that you do across the state in New Hampshire. You know, caregiving, when I think about it, it's an outrage that millions of Americans and billions of dollars just here in New Hampshire go hours of work and care. It's already some of the hardest work that you can imagine a person could do. It takes a big heart and a lot of energy to be a caregiver. And I've talked to people all across New Hampshire who are doing this every single day, and so many of them doing it uncompensated. They're out of the workforce, and it's extremely costly. You know, Medicaid and Medicare, these programs make caregiving possible for so many people in New Hampshire. We've been having town halls around the state. We had one in Keene, where I heard directly from this extraordinary couple, Claudia and John Derry. They live in Harrisville, and they rely on Medicaid and on the programs that Medicaid offers for Claudia to be able to provide care to John while also pursuing her. She's a lifelong teacher. When we talk about the biggest cuts to Medicaid in American history, she came to my town hall to say, I want to put a human face on what these cuts mean to people in New Hampshire. And I have in my mind thousands of human faces, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of human faces here in New Hampshire and millions across the country who are going to feel the pain of these cuts, who are going to be unable to live their lives and provide care for the people who they love. I mean, when we talk about the biggest cuts to Medicaid in American history, we're talking about people losing their lives. People's lives depend on this program. And if you want to be cold and calculated about it, we're also talking about costs of healthcare rising for everyone in this room and everyone in our country. You know, I believe this is an area where we should be able to find common ground because everyone is touched by this, whether it's caregiving for a parent or a grandparent or caregiving for a child. This is a huge gap in New Hampshire and across our country. We lack the workforce that we need, and right now the programs that make caregiving possible for so many people are in peril. So I want to hear from continue to hear from AARP every day to put a human face and a human story behind what these numbers and what these cuts mean. This is going to cause real harm to real people. So I thank you for everything AARP is doing, and I couldn't be more excited to be working with you in this fight.
Thank you. We are too.
Thank you.
Randy Schroeder from TRIO. We're going to have a mic come over to you. Here's the mic right behind you.
Now
mic.
you're a TRIO grad.
I'm a TRIO grad, yes.
Our most famous Upward Bound alumnus is on the stage right now, and he's a National TRIO Achiever as well. Thank you for being here, and thank you for visiting
Take your time,
TRIO.
ask all you want, all the questions you want.
Okay,
Go ahead.
should
Randy.
I stop there?
Take your time, no rush.
Thank you for visiting our TRIO Day in Nashua. 400 kids and staff, and they just loved your interactions with them, and the admissions reps too. And I'm glad to hear your interactions with Secretary McMahon and the Department of Education. TRIO's been around since 1964, 1965, 61 years. Upward Bound was created by the Educational Opportunity Act in 1964. And these programs work well at the federal level. Personally, I think they're very efficient. So to download them to states and to set up 50 different infrastructures just wouldn't be effective at all. So please keep up that fight. TRIO works, that's our motto. We have several TRIO staff here from Plymouth State and the University of New Hampshire. So thank you for your support.
No, thank you. And I raised TRIO in this meeting because it's a great example of what a return on investment that really can make. I mean, we're talking about relatively small sums of money that go towards changing literally millions of lives since the beginning of this program. And we have an amazing alum here, living proof of what these programs can do. And so to not have an answer to the question when you're leading a department that administers these important programs is absolutely unacceptable. And you deserve answers. We all deserve answers to what the plan is here and what it really means to dismantle the Department of Education. You know, we don't have the capacity here in New Hampshire to be able to administer all of these programs. And so I'm going to fight with everything I've got for them and for TRIO and for all of the good work that's being done across the state. You know, this is the people who will pay the real price of this are students and teachers, and it's part of a broader attack on public education. That the best antidote to that is to make the case and to show in real terms the human lives that have been changed and what it means for our country. And I saw that firsthand in Nashua, and I couldn't be more excited to be working with you and fighting for you in Congress.
Gentleman in the rear with the distinguished bow tie.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you, Congresswoman, for being here. I'm Micah Stark with the New Hampshire College and University Council. We represent 19 colleges and universities in the state. Following on the topic of staying on the topic of education, the Pell Grant program allows tens of thousands of New Hampshire students to afford higher education at a time when we need more people in higher education for our economy and for their own livelihood. Given the Trump administration's disruption and dismantling of the Department of Education, we're concerned about the future of the Pell Grant program and would just ask that you continue to advocate for that program. And the Pell Grant program is also in need of increasing the award. The award is not keeping pace for students to afford higher education, and so would just appreciate your advocacy for the Pell Grant program.
Well, you've got it. And I'm in the midst of, this was another question I asked of Secretary McMahon, because this is a program that has had bipartisan support, and by the way, I want to get a list of every member of Congress, sitting and former, who's relied on a Pell Grant, who's been able to leverage a Pell Grant to make their future possible, so I'd love to work with you on that. And, I'm grateful for what you're doing to protect the work of our colleges and universities in New Hampshire. It's such a big part of, they're engines for economic growth, and for bringing us into the future. And there's never been a more difficult and uncertain time to be doing the work that you're doing. So thank you.
We've had 3 gentlemen ask questions. We got to have a woman. Yes, we got to get the mic down here. Who's got the mic? Oh, there it comes. Wow.
But I'll use it anyhow. Hi, thank you for taking time to chat with us. I'm Sandy from Liberty Utilities. We were in chatting with you last month about LIHEAP. Yeah. And we spent several days chatting with other offices, and we're in 12 other states. A lot of our states are red states, and there's complete bipartisan support for LIHEAP. So we left going, okay, maybe we're going to be okay. And then HHS, as you know, cut the 25 staff members that administer the LIHEAP program. And so I know that our trade associations are, up on the Hill talking to their champions, and we plan to do the same. What can Congress do, though? Is there something I know that Representative Pappas is circulating a letter right now. Is there something that Congress can do on this? I mean, I understand the funding piece, but this is a staffing piece. So, and what should we ask for next week when we, Liberty, go and we do some of our advocacy? What should we be asking for? Yeah, look, this is another example of the kind of senseless cruelty, frankly, in cutting. These are 25 people who make one of the most important cost of living programs possible for our federal government. It has had longstanding and deep bipartisan support. So we're talking about 25 people. I think at bottom what this is about, we've sent oversight letter. We're going to work with our partners here in New Hampshire who are doing an assessment probably as we speak to try to figure out how we continue to administer the program without the support. And we're talking about 25 people. But there's so many people in this room who can probably testify to the importance that one federal worker, whether it's at HUD or at EPA or at HHS, who makes your work possible. I think that we'll have to take a close look at what the impact is on congressional mandates. So Congress legislates, creates requirements that then the executive branch has got to carry out. And so if they are not living up to that, that's a basis for enforcing these requirements, in federal court. And look, we've got a system of 3 co-equal branches, and this is an important tool that we have. But I think the most powerful thing that we've got to do alongside really getting clear and enforcing what the law requires, this is another area where I'm hopeful that we're going to have Republican colleagues shouting as loudly as we are about the impact and the damage that this is going to do to millions of people in our country. Well, thank you. So the best thing you can do is to continue to advocate and to raise the alarm and to educate my Republican colleagues, which is what I'm doing every single day in every way I can. Well, thank you. And again, thank you for your support of the program. It's really vital, as you know, to many people, including a lot of people in New Hampshire. So yes, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
One quick question, Eversource. The mic is coming. Yep.
Thank you. So a lot of the topics that we talked about today focused on bipartisan efforts in Congress and one of the many actions of the executive branch right now that you maybe don't support. Can you speak to anything that the current administration has done in the last 74 days that you do support? Take as long as you'd like.
Any other softball questions you want to just ask? That's it.
Well, I was encouraged. One of the things that happened this week that was sort of remarkable, on a bipartisan basis, we had 2 of my colleagues introduced a petition to try to get onto the floor a basic provision that would allow for remote voting for my colleagues who are about to have a child or who have just had a child to vote by proxy, so to vote remotely themselves, but actually it's a very simple thing that existed during COVID. The speaker relied on it dozens of times to cast his own ballot in the midst of a global pandemic. So this bill was packaged in, and the parliamentary and procedural tactics make it complicated for a lot of my colleagues to really cut through the noise and figure out what at bottom. So this was put into a rules package, this discharge petition. So they were hoping that they could defeat the proxy voting petition by putting it in together with the entire week's legislative package, which unfortunately included, eliminated provisions that would have lowered credit card costs and a whole, would have made life more expensive. So it's nice that we had the delay in this respect. But basically what happened was 9 of my Republican colleagues took a look at what this provision looked like, and one of them, Tim Burchett, who you might have seen on the internet, he makes very entertaining direct-to-camera videos when we're walking out of the House of Representatives. Tim and I don't always agree, but on this one, he thought, this seems ridiculous. It's a sensible idea to let Republicans and Democrats actually cast their ballot if they're unable to travel in person because they've just had a child or they're about to have a child. I'm very delighted that President Trump was willing to break with Speaker Johnson and say, this seems like a very sensible provision that we should all support. So at a time when it feels like common sense is often dead, this was a very good common sense measure that President Trump has supported. So that's the most recent example. But look, I'm sure that there will be others, and I'll find them wherever they are. But what I hope to see is more of a respect for common sense when it comes to keeping our people safe. We didn't get a chance to talk about FEMA, but this is another example of why are we dismantling an agency that New Hampshire relies on for basic public safety every single day. It doesn't make a whole lot of common sense. So I hope we'll all be guided by that in the days ahead.
Thank you. Right. Well, I know we're on a tight schedule, and I think she's going to be meeting with, the Congressman's going to be meeting with some people in the Rising Star afterwards. I haven't been invited. I think I'm part of the Falling Star.
No,
but,
you're always invited.
No, that's okay. Hey, when you're 100, you don't get invited to many places. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the big question that's on everyone's mind in this room. Do you think the Red Sox are going to win the opener today? Huh?
I believe in the Red Sox. Now and forever.
I know. With that, let's give a warm appreciation.
Thank you.